Welcome back. This is part two of the Chris Watts prison interview analysis. And where we left off, we had established the extreme nature of this situation and also that it's less of an interview and more of a play. Everyone is playing a character to push a narrative that doesn't really exist. The FBI pretending to be Chris's friend to get him to talk because Chris is kind of like a shark that doesn't know its fin is sticking up above the water. Everyone can see the shark there, but the shark doesn't know. And he hasn't talked in the 6 months since he's been arrested, other than admitting just enough to lighten his sentence. But the FBI still wants to know the details. There's still this feeling that justice hasn't entirely been served. His victims' stories haven't been told yet at the point where this prison interview starts. So Graham and Tammy, in order to get these answers and to get more details, which they do, they will have to sink lower than they ever have before into the depths of deception, but it's justifiable deception because they're doing it to someone who is unjustifiable in his deception. And what a pleasure it was to hear Graham and Tammy again, especially Graham, because he is just dripping with disingenuous admiration as he's trying to make Chris sound unique to butter him up. Like, hey, buddy, we think your situation was unique and we have a lot of questions for you and a couple things that we want to say to you from people in your life that we think you want to hear, and we think that you're going to be better from this. We don't intend to take you to a dark place today, buddy. Just oozing with insincere friendship. And they make Chris sound unique because they know that's what he wants to hear, because they've already listened to his phone conversations from prison with his family. So they are kind of aligning themselves with Chris's family in order to get him to talk, to make themselves seem like his friend and open up with him. Because he's not opening up with the world that is just heaping shame and ridicule upon him. He's not revealing anything to them, but he does open up a little bit to his family in the phone conversations before this interview takes place. So Chris is kind of the FBI is putting themselves in the same category with Chris's family so that he will open up. And they're making him sound unique the same way that in the prison phone calls where they say that his family says, "Oh, we still love you. You're the golden child, and we know you were a good father. We know what she was like. We know you were a good husband. We know what she was like. We know you would never do this if you weren't pushed to do it." And the FBI doesn't go as far, Graham and Tammy, they don't go as far as Chris's family does in buttering him up. But they do have to sink to some low lows to stay in character. Like in the interrogation, they kind of were able to show their human side a little by letting their true feelings come out towards Chris a couple of times. And Chris, in that interrogation, went from one end of the spectrum to the other. But all members of this prison interview stay in character more strongly. And so there's less dynamism to it, but much more complex and subtle psychological tactics going on from both sides as they both try to stay in character. And the FBI trying to get more details, and Chris trying to get his narcissistic supply with what he thinks are his friends on his side, just chit-chatting, while also trying to hide who he is. It's interesting because there's this dichotomy where he reveals more details of the horrible crimes he committed, and yet he protects himself further with more ridiculous frameworks to hide the horrific nature of the details, which we'll get into more of that later. And so how do Graham and Tammy align themselves with Chris's family? First of all, Graham says, I don't know about you, but I really appreciated what your parents said at sentencing. And at the sentencing hearing when Chris's parents got up and said, basically, we love you, we forgive you, and everyone supports you and loves you. Now, anyone who has seen all of the evidence and all of the footage knows that what Chris's parents said was inappropriate and inconsiderate towards the true victims of the crime, and ridiculous to an extent because based on how Chris behaved, he is not deserving of any forgiveness or any love or any support. But his family does because they are protecting him and protecting themselves to a delusional extent. Like, we can't really put ourselves in their shoes, but we can compare them to other parents who have had children that do horrific things, like James Holmes, the idiot Joker wannabe who shot up a theater. His parents are pretty realistic about what their son did. But Chris's parents just come off delusional in every way that they portray him because they're trying to protect his image, thereby, in this symbiotic relationship, protect their own image. He would never do this if he wasn't pushed to do it. Therefore, we're okay too. So Graham right away is establishing that they're on his parents' side. Therefore, they see Chris the same way that his parents see Chris, to get him to open up. And it works because Chris does open up. However, I wonder if Chris's parents would have given the same victim impact statements had Chris murdered his sister and her kids instead. Would they be saying he's such a perfect child and would never do anything? We know Chris would kill innocent women and children because he did it. So it's in the realm of possibility that he would do it to someone else again. Now, I think their victim impact statements would have been slightly different had Chris one day decided that his life would be better if he got his sister and her kids out of the way. So if this wasn't a play and it was just 100% honest, it would be over in seconds. And the FBI knows that. That's why they have to do this performance as these characters, aligning themselves with Chris and his family. Because if everyone was just 100% honest in this thing right from the get-go, it would sound more like, Chris, you've lied so much about this. Just tell us what happened to your family. All we really care about is your victim's story. We want to know what happened to them, your wife and your kids, what they really went through. That's all we care about. So just tell us the truth now and stop lying to us so we can get out of here and get out of your sight. And Chris would just say, I only care about protecting myself and making everyone like me. And that would be the end. There would be nothing left to say after that. So it's good that Graham and Tammy resisted honesty, because then we got more details and we got more of what the victims went through and more of revealing what a person will lower themselves to do despite never admitting to it directly. But part of me does like to imagine some alternate universe where instead of aligning themselves with Chris, Graham just starts off saying, Chris, forget this case, forget my job, forget the truth. You are the dumbest human being I have ever met and ever talked to. When the coroner throws your brain in the garbage bin where it belongs, it will look like a June bug flying into the eye of a hurricane, you moron. But thankfully, Graham resisted that and instead stuck with his performance. And we got another 4.5 hours of details that we can put into the context of the crime to reveal more of the truth. That's what we're going to get into now, is the vast gulf between looking at this whole prison interview out of context and then putting it in the context of the crime. If you only listen to the prison interview, you can halfway believe it. I can speak from experience on that because it was the first thing that I listened to. Up until then, I had only seen the headlines and seen pictures. And when I saw the family photos without knowing any of the details of the crime, I said, who's that creepy guy in the picture? He doesn't look like he belongs there. Is he the guy that made the people go missing? And then I was surprised to find out that he was actually the father and the husband. And it made sense that he was the one guilty. He looked like it. And then months later, when the thumbnail for the prison interview started showing up, and you saw him there with that scoop shovel of a face and that idea bulb of a head, he looked perfectly natural in his prison suit and in the prison office. And I was thinking, how did no one see this coming? Why is everyone acting like this act was such a shocking thing from this guy? Look at that face. Look at that head. Why is this a surprise? Why is it getting such headlines? So how did I go from thinking that to 4.5 hours later listening to the prison interview and actually sympathizing with Chris Watts and halfway believing these details and actually relating some of them to my own life as if this was a normal person who just snapped? I've halfway bought and suspended my disbelief into this fake story that all 4 members of this prison interview were pushing, that Chris really was a loving family man who snapped through all these circumstances in his life. And then when you compare it to all of the evidence and the footage available, you will find out it's as far in the other direction as you can possibly get. He had no love for his family and only pretended to, convincingly enough, because as Graham establishes in his opening statement, to this day, there is not one person who said, I saw this coming. And then later on, Tammy will say, we see you in those family videos and you're giving piggyback rides and watching princess movies, and we can see the love, and we wonder how you get to the point of doing this to your family. To some extent, I don't think she worded it that directly where she would accuse him, because they used very soft language throughout this thing. But the idea was the same. How did no one see this coming, and how do you get to the point where you would do this? And we know Chris was very deliberate to do it. It wasn't like he just suddenly found himself in this situation and accidentally did it. And we'll get into a lot of that. So it's such a vast gulf, and that's why people fall for it, because they don't bother to compare the surface story, the fake play performed by the fake characters. They just believe that without bothering to look into and compare it to more evidence that's available, because it serves their needs, much like Chris's family needs to believe, Chris's parents and his sister and everyone in his life that supports him, everyone who loves and supports him, like they said in sentencing hearing and like they said in the phone conversations with him in prison. They need to believe that he really is a good guy because it serves their purpose. And Graham and Tammy we're 10 minutes in at this point, and there's still no mention of the crimes. You would have no idea what they're talking about. They say things like, obviously we're going to talk about what happened to your family. When if that was 100% honest, they would say, obviously we're going to talk about how you murdered heartlessly your pregnant wife and your innocent children because you thought it would lead to a better life and thought you can get away with it. They never even come close to touching that kind of wording. It's, we're going to talk about what happened to your family and the situation that you found yourself in. Because Chris is just going to put up that wall if it was like the sentencing hearing where we got the closest thing to anybody directly speaking to Chris the way he deserves to be spoken to about what he did and who he really is and what he's trying to hide, was at the sentencing hearing when Shanann's family did their victim impact statements, and when the DA and the judge summed up the case and how Chris behaved and the sentence he deserves. That was very satisfying to listen to, because it's as close as we got to someone just telling Chris the truth about himself. And most of what we get everywhere else is this kind of soft language that Graham and Tammy and Baum overuse, where they phonily align themselves with him and speak about the crime as if it was just some event that happened outside of Chris's control, when in reality, Chris had 100% control of what he was doing and met the outcome he was striving for. But they can never admit that in this prison interview, because when everyone spoke to Chris at the sentencing hearing about what he did and who he was and how he should be viewed, and ever since that, the hatred he's gotten from most of the public, all he can say to that, "Do you have any final statements to say?" is what the judge said at sentencing hearing. And Chris, after being berated by Shanann's family, the DA, and the judge, Chris just said, "No, sir," like a little wimpy, cowardly heel, afraid to say anything, as not even sorry, because he's just wallowing in his own shame. So Graham and Tammy and Baumover know that that's not the right approach to take. You can't just berate Chris to get him to speak the truth. You have to feed and buy into the character that he's portraying in order to get him to reveal his truth. And they do that to an extent. But at the same time, they're going up against this wall of Chris, who is still, even though he's revealing things to get his narcissistic supply, the way he does with his family, he is also sticking to his character. He's learned his lesson from the interrogation that he needs to stick to this character that he's portraying in order for everyone to think highly of him. So we'll get into more of that later, and I'll see you next time in part 3.